The bridge of the United Earthship, the Steadfast, was quiet, but the main view screen screamed. Before them, the planet Viridia was dying. Its sun, an angry red giant, was lashing out in its death throes, bathing the world in a hellish corona. Waves of fire and radiation washed over the planet's surface, boiling away oceans and turning continents to glass. Caught in the inferno were the Campunians, their small, flimsy ships scattered around the planet like dying insects, their hulls cracking under the intense heat. A single faint distress signal was all that was left of their civilization, a weak whisper against a roar of cosmic violence. First Officer Jian, a pragmatic and cautious woman, stepped beside Admiral Eris Thorn. "Admiral," she said, her voice tight with concern, "the radiation is off the charts. Our shields won't hold for long if we get any closer. Standard protocol is to maintain distance and log the event." Eris Thorn didn't answer immediately. He was an old soldier, his face a roadmap of 100 battles, his eyes having seen too much war to stomach a slaughter. He watched the view screen as one of the tiny Campunian ships finally gave up, breaking apart in a silent flash of light. He imagined the terror, the hopelessness. He turned away from the screen, his expression set like stone. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the silence of the bridge. "No one deserves to die like this." He straightened his back, and the quiet man was gone. In his place stood the Admiral of the 7th Fleet. His voice now rang with absolute authority, echoing across the bridge. "Communications. Open a fleet-wide channel. Priority 1 is now search and rescue. All hands, all ships." He paused, his eyes meeting his first officers. Whatever the cost, a new energy surged through the bridge. The cold calculus of protocol was forgotten, replaced by the heat of a desperate, noble cause. On the screens, the massive human ships began to move, turning their bows away from safety and heading directly into the fire. For the people of Viridia, despair had reigned. But now, hope had arrived in the heart of a sea of fire. The rescue was chaos. On the bridge of the Steadfast, alarms blared as pilots weaved their smaller ships through a storm of fire and debris. Every rescued life was a victory, every lost ship a scar. Admiral Thorn directed the ballet of destruction and salvation with a steady hand, but his eyes were fixed on one critical situation. A large, slow Campunian transport, overloaded with thousands of souls, was on a collision course with a massive fragment of Viridia's shattered moon. It couldn't turn in time. "The transport won't make it," shouted First Officer Jian. Before Thorn could give an order, a voice crackled over the comms, sharp and clear. "This is Captain Eva Rostova of the UES Valiant. We see them?" "For the mission, Admiral." Thorn watched in grim silence as the sleek human destroyer, the Valiant, broke formation. It positioned itself directly between the helpless transport and the oncoming rock. The destroyer's hoisted shields flared, a brilliant blue bubble against the darkness. For a moment they held. The rock impacted, and the blue bubble shattered. Then the Valiant and its entire crew vanished in a silent, brilliant flash. The Campunian transport drifted past the impact point, unharmed. Eris Thorn closed his eyes for a single, painful second. He opened them again, his face a mask of cold resolve. A short time later, a group of high-value survivors from that very transport was brought to the bridge. Among them was a young man covered in soot, his clothes torn, but his eyes burned with a sharp intelligence that cut through his exhaustion. This was Lorcan, the young leader of the Campunian people. He took in the scene of the human bridge, the calm efficiency, the advanced technology, the sheer power on display. His gaze found Admiral Thorn. He immediately understood this was the man in command, the man who had saved them. Overwhelmed, Lorcan stumbled forward and fell to his knees before the Admiral. He grabbed Eris's hand, his voice hoarse with emotion, speaking in the simple, universal trade language. "Thank you," he wept, pressing his forehead to the Admiral's hand. "You saved us. My people. We owe you everything. Everything." Eris Thorn looked down with compassion at the young leader, a symbol of the lives they had fought so hard to save. He placed a steadying hand on Lorcan's shoulder. But as Lorcan looked up, his eyes wet with what seemed to be pure, unyielding gratitude, the audience and the universe alone could hear the thoughts swirling behind them. A part of his mind, cold and calculating, saw not a savior, but a master. It saw not kindness, but an almost obscene display of power. "They are so powerful," the thought whispered. "Is this kindness real or just another form of dominance? One day, we must have this strength for ourselves." "Get up, son," Admiral Thorn said gently, helping the young leader to his feet. "The fight is over. It's time to build a new home." He saw a grateful ally. The universe saw a debt that would one day be repaid with betrayal. 50 years passed. In the annals of human history, the rescue of Viridia became a celebrated event, a testament to the compassion and strength of the United Earth government. Admiral Eris Thorne was a legend, and the story was taught to children as an example of humanity at its best. On their new homeworld, New Viridia, the Campunians thrived. Guided by human technology and their own resilience, they built gleaming cities and a prosperous society. The bond between the two races was seen as the strongest alliance in the sector, a relationship forged in fire and gratitude. The first crack in that 50-year alliance appeared in the quiet void of space. The UES Explorer, a human science vessel on a peaceful mission to chart gravitational anomalies, was operating in a remote sector near New Viridia's territory. Its last transmission was a routine systems check, then only silence. After a week of failed attempts to re-establish contact, a search party was dispatched. They found nothing, no wreckage, no debris, no black box signal. The Explorer had simply vanished. The Campunian government responded with what appeared to be great urgency and sorrow. Their official message was a masterpiece of diplomatic sympathy. They reported that their long-range sensors had detected a sudden, violent, and highly localized ion storm in the Explorer's last known position. Such storms, they explained, were rare but notoriously destructive, often leaving no trace of the ships they consumed. They offered their deepest condolences to the families of the crew and to their oldest and dearest friends, the people of Earth. The United Earth Command, trusting their 50-year allies, officially closed the file on the UES Explorer. The final entry read, "Lost with all hands due to a catastrophic ion storm." A tragic, unavoidable accident. Deep beneath the gleaming cities and peaceful parks of New Viridia, in a secret hangar bathed in cold white light, the UES Explorer rested. It was not a wreck. Its hull was largely intact, scarred only by the precise incisions of plasma cutters. Around it, Campunian engineers in immaculate clean suits moved with quiet purpose. They weren't salvaging wreckage. They were carefully, methodically, and expertly dismantling a prize. With diagnostic tools and laser saws, they dissected the human ship piece by piece, reverse engineering its advanced engine, its computer core, its shield emitters. A laser beam sliced through a metal plate on the ship's hull. On the plate was the insignia of the United Earth government. The beam cut through the symbol without hesitation, separating the olive branch of peace from the sword of protection. The next crack appeared not in space, but in a classroom. On New Viridia, education was a pillar of their new society. In a bright, airy room filled with holographic displays, a class of young Campunian children sat with rapt attention. Their teacher, a woman named Lyra, with a warm smile and a gentle voice, was conducting a history lesson. The subject was the Great Exodus, the story of their people's survival. A stunning hologram of their old, burning homeworld, Viridia, filled the center of the room. But the heroic images were not of the massive human fleet. Instead, the display focused on the small, brave Campunian ships navigating the solar flares. "In our darkest hour," Lyra said, her voice filled with pride, "when our world was taken from us by the dying sun, our spirit never broke. We faced annihilation and chose survival. With our own strength and indomitable will, we journeyed into the unknown to find a new home." She gestured gracefully to the hologram. "And we were not entirely alone. We received assistance from several allies in our journey, including the humans, whose support was appreciated during our great exodus." The words were chosen with surgical precision. Assistance, allies plural, as if the humans were just one of many. Appreciated, a word one might use for a trivial favor, not for a rescue that cost hundreds of lives. A small child in the front row, his eyes wide with curiosity, raised his hand. "Teacher Lyra," he asked innocently, "so, were the humans important?" Lyra's warm smile never wavered. She knelt down to the child's level, her voice soft and reassuring. "All help is valuable, of course," she said, patting his head. "But remember this, little one. It was our hands that built these cities. It was our spirit that conquered despair. It was our will that forged this new world." The children nodded, their young minds absorbing the lesson. They looked at the images of their brave ancestors, and their hearts filled with pride for their self-reliant, powerful race. And so the greatest rescue in a generation was reduced to a footnote. The sacrifice of the UES Valiant and its crew was now just appreciated support. History was not just being forgotten, it was being meticulously and deliberately erased, one classroom at a time. The Grand Hall of the Galactic Council was a place of immense scale and history. Floating platforms for 1,000 different species drifted in the vast, star-dusted chamber. a place where the fate of galaxies had been decided for millennia. The human delegation, led by a stoic ambassador, sat with quiet confidence, believing they were there to mediate a minor border dispute. They were unprepared for the theater that was about to unfold. Lorcan, the leader of the Campunians, was now a revered elder. He walked to the central podium slowly, leaning on a staff of polished viridian wood. He let his shoulders slump, the very picture of a weary leader, burdened by the weight of his people's suffering. He commanded the sympathy of the hall before he even spoke. And when he did speak, his voice trembled with a masterful performance of sorrow. "Honored delegates," he began, his voice echoing through the silent hall. "I do not come here today as a leader, but as a survivor of one tragedy, only to find my people living through another." He paused, raising a trembling hand to his eye to wipe away a single tear that seemed to catch the light of the hall perfectly. For just a fraction of a second before the sorrow flooded his features, his eyes held a glint of cold, triumphant steel, a look that was gone before anyone could truly register it. 50 years ago, he continued, the people of Earth saved us. We were eternally grateful. But gratitude over time can curdle into fear. A child who is always watched by his parent never learns to walk on his own. We were that child, and humanity became our benevolent jailers. He raised his hand again, and holographic evidence filled the air. The council gasped. They saw videos of human soldiers, but the footage was cleverly edited. A soldier offering a food ration to a hungry Campunian child was zoomed in and slowed down, the music ominous, making the act of kindness look like a threat. A human patrol ship flying over a Campunian city was shown from a low angle, making the peaceful vessel look like an occupying war machine. He presented the trade and land treaties. He pointed to clauses about mutual defense and called them forced conscription. He highlighted economic partnerships and twisted them into economic enslavement. He crafted each word, each pause, to elicit maximum sympathy and outrage. The whisper started, a low murmur at first, then growing into a tide of judgment. The delegates on their floating platforms began to turn, physically aiming their gazes of condemnation at the human delegation. The Takar ambassador, whose own people had a minor trade dispute with Earth, nodded with grim satisfaction. The delegate from the Segnan Confederacy, a rival power, openly scoffed. The human ambassador, a woman named Alara, sat pale with disbelief, her hands clenched into fists beneath the console, her knuckles white. She looked at her delegation, seeing on their faces the same mixture of shock and profound personal injury. 50 years of friendship, of celebrating the Campunians as their greatest success story, all of it was turning to ash before her eyes. Lorcan concluded his speech, bowing his head in false humility as murmurs of support filled the hall. He stepped down from the podium, leaving the human delegation isolated, condemned, and utterly alone in the center of the galaxy's judgment. As the tide of judgment in the Grand Hall turned against humanity, Admiral Eris Thorn rose from his seat. The sound of his polished military boots echoed on the grand floor, a slow, deliberate rhythm that cut through the whispers of the assembly. He did not go to the main podium where Lorcan had performed his theater. He stood in the very center of the hall, his calm presence a stark contrast to the feigned sorrow of the Campunian leader. He waited until all eyes were on him. The Galactic Council is a chamber for truth, Eris began, his voice steady and clear. Not a stage for carefully constructed deceptions. Elder Lorcan has presented his evidence. Now allow me to present ours. He gestured, and a new hologram appeared. Let's begin with the treaties Elder Lorcan called enslavement. The full, unedited text of the original agreements appeared, with key clauses highlighted. As you can see, the forced conscription he spoke of was, in fact, a mutual defense pact that the Campunian leadership themselves proposed and ratified. The economic enslavement was a trade partnership that gave them access to galactic markets at subsidized rates, lifting their people from poverty. A murmur of confusion went through the hall. Eris continued, his voice growing colder. Elder Lorcan then spoke of the tragic loss of our science vessel, the UES Explorer, in an ion storm. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. A lie! A new hologram replaced the old one. It showed a detailed star chart, IR chart of the sector in question. This is the complete sensor log from our listening post for the week the Explorer vanished. There was no ion storm. There was, however, a red circle appeared on the map, a Campunian stealth cruiser at these exact coordinates, at that exact time. Lorcan's face began to lose its color. The council members leaned forward, their expressions shifting from judgment to intense curiosity. You also claimed, Iris said, his voice dropping slightly, that there were no survivors. Another lie. He turned and looked towards the grand entrance of the hall. I present to this council Captain Anya Sharma, commanding officer of the UES Explorer. The massive doors of the chamber slid open. A woman in a battered but clean human military uniform walked in, flanked by a dozen of her surviving crew members. Her face was scarred, but her eyes burned with an unbreakable fire. A collective gasp went through the hall. The delegates rose to their feet in shock. Lorcan stumbled backward, his face a mask of pure terror. Captain Sharma stepped forward. Her voice was raw but strong. We were not hit by a storm. We were ambushed by the Campunian warship Talon. They disabled our ship, killed those who resisted, and took the rest of us prisoner. For months, we were held in a secret prison on one of New Viridia's moons, while they tried to torture our ship's technological secrets out of us. She looked directly at Lorcan. We were rescued 3 days ago by a human special operations team. The hall erupted in chaos. But Eris Thorn raised a hand, and silence fell once more. The betrayal, however, goes deeper than piracy, Eris said, his voice now like ice. It is an act of war. The intelligence we recovered during that rescue mission was extensive. He played the final piece of evidence. The hologram now showed a grainy, distorted video, clearly filmed by a hidden device. It showed Lorcan in his private chambers, speaking with his top general. The humans are distracted by the council. Lorcan's voice echoed through the hall, arrogant and clear. Their attention is here. Now is the time. I want you to prepare a surprise attack on the human colony at Ares Prime. Use unmarked ships. Make it look like pirates. The general in the video asked, And the council, my lord? Lorcan smiled, a cruel, predatory expression. The council will be busy condemning the humans for provoking us. By the time they figure out the truth, we will have a new military outpost, and they will have another tragedy to cry about. The video ended. The silence that followed was absolute, heavier than a dying star. Every lie, every deception had been systematically dismantled and exposed with cold, hard proof. Lorcan's strength finally left him. His face, once a picture of revered wisdom, was now just that of a common criminal unmasked. He made a small, choking sound and crumpled to the floor like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Admiral Eris Thorn stood unmoved in the center of the hall. He had not raised his voice. He had not shed a tear. He had simply presented the naked, brutal truth. And with it, he had passed judgment. A deep, unnatural silence pressed down on the grand hall. The shocking video feed had vanished, but the truth it revealed lingered in the air, thick and suffocating. The delegates of 1,000 worlds stared, not at the triumphant humans, but at the pathetic figure of Lorcan, still crumpled on the floor before the podium. The galaxy's greatest liar had run out of lies. Admiral Eris Thorn ignored the silent, staring assembly. He began to walk, his footsteps echoing with grim purpose as he moved from the center of the hall towards the podium. He did not look at the other delegates. They no longer mattered. His entire focus was on the trembling Campunian leader on the floor. He stopped, standing over Lorcan, looking down not with anger, but with a profound, weary coldness. When he finally spoke, his voice was devoid of heat, devoid of passion. It was the voice of a judge stating a simple, unchangeable fact. We offered you a home when you had nothing but the fire at your back, Eris said, his voice a low rumble. You turned it into a nest of vipers. He let the words sink in. Lorcan looked up, his face a mess of tears and terror, and opened his mouth to beg, but no sound came out. We gave you life, Eris continued, his voice dropping even lower, colder. You chose deceit. The head of the council, a frail ancient being, finally found his voice. Admiral Thorn, by galactic law, there must be sanctions, a trial. Eris Thorn cut him off with a single, slow turn of his head. He did not raise his voice. He did not make a threat. He simply looked at the council leader, and in that look was the weight of 50 years of trust betrayed and the iron will of a military power that had been pushed too far. The council leader fell silent, shrinking back into his seat. The galactic law was irrelevant now. Eris turned his gaze back to Lorcan for the last time. Now, he said, the words falling like chips of ice, we will give you the only thing you deserve. He paused, letting the finality of the moment stretch into an eternity. Oblivion. With that, he discreetly tapped the side of his temple, activating a silent, encrypted channel on his personal comm device. It was a signal, almost invisible, but its meaning was absolute. His duty in this hall was done. Without another word, without a backward glance at the collapsing Lorcan or the terrified council, Admiral Eris Thorn turned and walked steadily toward the exit, his footsteps the only sound in a galaxy holding its breath. In the silent deep space above the beautiful planet of New Viridia, the human fleet moved. They did not rush. They did not charge. With the cold precision of a master surgeon preparing for an operation, hundreds of warships moved into a perfect, geometric grid surrounding the planet like a cage of gray steel. They were a wall of judgment, silent and absolute. On the bridge of the fleet's flagship, the UES Reckoning, Captain Kyra watched the planet fill her view screen. It was a jewel of green continents and swirling blue oceans. For a moment, one could see why her ancestors had fought so hard to give this home to the Campunians. A single encrypted message flashed on her private console. It contained only 4 words from Admiral Thorne. Directive 117 is go. Kira's face remained impassive. She looked away from the beautiful world below and turned to her weapons officer. Her voice was calm, clear, and steady. All ships, she commanded, her words broadcast across the entire fleet. Commence operation, annihilation. Target primary population centers first. Execute. And then the silent fury of humanity was unleashed. From the bellies of hundreds of ships, lances of pure white energy descended. There was no sound in the vacuum of space, only a terrible, silent beauty as the beams crossed the void, all aimed with unerring accuracy. The first beam struck the capital city of New Viridia, a gleaming metropolis of elegant spires and lush parks. The city did not explode. It did not burn. It simply ceased to exist, replaced in a microsecond by a rapidly expanding circle of white-hot, sterilized earth. The fleet operated with the passionless precision of a machine. As one beam faded, another was already striking a new target. On the tactical map aboard the Reckoning, hundreds of green dots representing Campunian cities and infrastructure blinked, one by one to red. A second volley erased the planet's primary industrial zones. A third boiled away the coastal habitats. Mountain ranges were flattened. Coastlines were redrawn with fire. Verdant forests became black deserts in the blink of an eye. The beautiful planet was being systematically, methodically, and completely unmade. It was not a battle, it was an extermination. After a few short, eternal minutes, the final beam faded. The human fleet hung in its perfect, silent formation. Below them, the jewel of green and blue was gone. In its place hung a blackened, scarred sphere, glowing with the dull red of cooling magma and shrouded in an atmosphere of ash. A tomb world. On the bridge of the Reckoning, the tactical officer reported, his voice a flat monotone. All primary and secondary targets have been neutralized. Planetary bioscan is negative. Life signs, 0. Captain Kyra gave a single curt nod. Her duty was done. Send the report to the Admiral, she said, her voice as cold as the space outside. The sentence has been carried out. The UES Reckoning sailed silently through the endless night. The war, if one could call such a one-sided execution a war, was over. In his private quarters, Admiral Eris Thorne stood alone. He did not watch the tactical reports or review the mission data. He simply stood before the great armored viewport, his back to the room, looking out at the cold, indifferent stars. They glittered in the darkness, just as they had 50 years ago, oblivious to the rise and fall of civilizations, to acts of kindness and to acts of terrible retribution. A soft chime sounded at his door. "Enter," Eris said, his voice quiet. A young lieutenant stepped inside, his uniform immaculate, but his face pale and his hands clasped nervously behind his back. He was one of the many young officers who had only known the Campunians as peaceful allies. "Admiral," the young man reported, his voice steady despite his unease. "Captain Kyra confirms. All fleet objectives are complete. The sentence has been carried out." Eris Thorne did not move. He continued to gaze into the void. The silence stretched, becoming heavy and uncomfortable for the young officer. He shuffled his feet, feeling the need to say something more, to understand the monumental event he had just been a part of. Mustering all his courage, he spoke again, his voice now barely a whisper. "Admiral, sir," he hesitated, Did we do the right thing?" The question hung in the silent room, a question of morality, of honor, of the very soul of humanity. Eris did not turn around. His silhouette remained framed against the sea of stars. After a long, weary moment, he finally answered. His voice was devoid of triumph, devoid of anger, heavy with the weight of a lesson learned in fire and betrayal. "No," he said, "we became a lesson." The young lieutenant did not understand the depth of those words, but he understood the finality in his admiral's tone. He knew there was nothing more to be said. "Yes, sir," he whispered, then gave a crisp salute to the admiral's back, turned, and quietly exited the room, leaving Eris Thorn alone once more with the stars and the chilling echo of his own verdict.